While the world watches the fire, China is reading the smoke, not reacting, not scrambling, not issuing emergency statements or holding crisis summits, or sending strongly worded diplomatic cables to capitals that are already overwhelmed with their own emergencies. Just watching, calculating, positioning. And here is what should genuinely unsettle you. Beijing's strategy in this moment is not complicated. It is not hidden behind layers of impenetrable diplomatic mystery. It is sitting right there in plain view, visible to anyone willing to set aside the noise of daily headlines and look at the actual shape of what China is doing. The problem is, almost nobody is looking. My name is Dr. Adrian Cole. This is Empire Signal. Today we go inside Beijing's thinking. We examine exactly how China sees this crisis, what strategic moves it is making in real time, and why its approach, quiet, patient, and devastatingly effective, may already be producing results that will reshape the global order long after the current headlines are forgotten. Stay with me. Let us begin with a concept that is absolutely essential to understanding how China operates at the highest levels of strategic thinking, not just in this crisis, but in every interaction with other great powers across decades. The Chinese call it Wei Qi. You may know it by its Japanese name, Go, an ancient board game, played for thousands of years across East Asia, deceptively simple in its rules, infinitely complex in its execution. 2 players, black stones and white stones placed on a grid, and the goal, this is the crucial part, is not what most Western observers assume. The goal is not to capture your opponent's pieces in a dramatic confrontation at the center of the board. The goal is not the decisive, visible, cinematic moment of triumph that Western strategic culture gravitates toward. The goal is to surround, to encircle, to control territory, gradually, methodically, almost invisibly, until your opponent looks up from the board and realizes that the position they thought was secure is already compromised, already enclosed, already too far gone to recover without catastrophic cost. American strategic culture plays chess, decisive moves, direct confrontation, clear lines of attack, a defined path to checkmate that everyone watching can follow. China plays Wei Qi, surrounding, positioning, placing stones not where the immediate battle is happening, but where the battle will matter in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years, when the encirclement that began quietly and without drama becomes suddenly, unmistakably visible. Keep that framework in your mind as we go through what Beijing is actually doing right now, because once you see the current crisis through the lens of Wei Qi, every single Chinese move becomes legible, logical, part of a coherent, long-term pattern that has been building for decades. The first move China made in this crisis was the move it did not make. When the US-Israel war on Iran began on February 28th, every major power on the planet faced an immediate choice: condemn the action publicly and risk direct confrontation with Washington, endorse it, and damage relationships across the Arab world and the global South, offer to mediate and insert yourself into a conflict you cannot control, withdraw entirely, and sacrifice whatever influence you had built. Every option had real costs. Every option committed Beijing to a visible position. China chose none of them. China simply continued. It did not condemn America in the sharp terms that would have triggered a direct diplomatic confrontation. It did not endorse the military action in ways that would have alienated the dozens of nations across the Muslim world and the developing world that China has spent years cultivating. It issued carefully calibrated statements calling for dialogue and restraint, language so precisely neutral that it committed Beijing to absolutely nothing while managing to irritate absolutely nobody. And underneath that public neutrality, quietly, without announcement, without any headline, it kept buying Iranian oil. This single decision, to maintain its economic relationship with Tehran while projecting public neutrality on the conflict, was the foundational move of China's entire strategy. The first stone placed on the board, the one that everything else builds from, because it kept Iran financially viable. And a financially viable Iran is an Iran that can keep the IRGC funded, that can sustain missile production and drone deployment at scale, that can keep military operations running across the region, that can keep the Strait of Hormuz under sustained, credible pressure. China did not design this crisis. It did not engineer the war or manufacture the Hormuz closure. It simply refused to give up the position that makes it indispensable to resolving both. That is Wei Qi. Not a dramatic, visible, headline-generating move. Just holding a position quietly and patiently until the value of that position becomes undeniable to everyone sitting at the table. The second move is playing out right now. While the world's attention is fixed on the Gulf, while America has been consumed by the Iran war, managing active military operations, navigating the economic consequences of the Hormuz closure, dealing with the domestic political pressure of an electorate that feels elevated fuel costs in daily life, China has been running an extraordinarily active diplomatic campaign across every region of the planet. Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, Central Asia, South Pacific, deals being finalized, infrastructure projects being launched, trade agreements being expanded, political relationships being cultivated with governments that feel, and Beijing is very deliberate about creating this feeling, that China treats them as genuine partners with legitimate interests, not as problems to be managed, not as resources to be extracted. This matters for a reason that goes far beyond the immediate crisis in the Gulf. The global order that America constructed after World War II did not rest on military power alone. It rested on a coalition, on the willingness of dozens of nations to align with American leadership because they believed that alignment served their interests more effectively than any available alternative. That coalition is now under stress, not because America has become hostile to its partners, but because the world has changed. New powers have emerged. Economic alternatives exist that simply did not exist before. Nations that once had no meaningful choices now have genuine options. And China has spent 2 decades positioning itself as the most resourced, most present, most committed alternative. While Washington manages the urgent, Beijing invests in the important. While America fights today's fire, China plants tomorrow's forest. One stone at a time, across every region simultaneously, building a web of relationships and obligations that grows more structurally significant with every passing year. This is Wei Qi at civilizational scale. The third move is the financial one, the piece that most analysis ignores entirely. For decades, the United States dollar has served as the world's reserve currency. Nations hold savings in dollars. Oil is priced in dollars. International trade is settled in dollars. This gives America a structural advantage of extraordinary power. When America applies financial sanctions, cutting a nation from the dollar system, it cuts that nation from global commerce itself. This is why American sanctions carry such devastating force, not because of the dollar's intrinsic value, because of its absolute centrality. China has been quietly building alternatives. The yuan is now used in a growing share of global trade settlements. The CIPS payment network provides a functional alternative to American-dominated SWIFT. China has signed currency swap agreements with dozens of countries. The BRICS framework has been developing mechanisms for non-dollar trade between its member nations. None of this has defeated dollar dominance. Not yet. But every percentage point of global trade shifting away from dollars reduces American financial leverage. Every nation building yuan capacity reduces its vulnerability to American sanctions. Every alternative system China constructs makes the American financial architecture slightly less unique, and therefore slightly less powerful. In a world where the Hormuz crisis has reminded every oil-importing nation how vulnerable dollar-denominated energy markets can be, China's alternatives look considerably more attractive than they did 12 months ago. One stone at a time, over decades, until the board looks different. And then there is Belt and Road. Over the past decade, Beijing has invested hundreds of billions of dollars building physical infrastructure across Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Europe. Deep-water ports, rail corridors, road networks, power generation facilities, fiber optic networks, the literal physical arteries of modern commerce. Western critics called it debt diplomacy, a trap designed to create dependency. There is legitimate debate about the terms of some arrangements. Some nations found the debt burden heavier than expected, but here is what the critics missed. By building deep-water ports across the Indian Ocean, by developing energy pipelines through Central Asia, by creating trade routes that bypass the choke points that American naval power controls, China has been constructing a parallel infrastructure of global commerce, one that, in a world where the Strait of Hormuz is closed and American sea lanes are under pressure, becomes dramatically more valuable than it appeared during peaceful decades. Nations with Belt and Road connections have options: alternative trade routes, alternative energy supply chains, alternative financial arrangements in yuan rather than dollars. They are structurally less dependent on the systems American power controls. Less dependent means less vulnerable. Less vulnerable means more room for independent choices. More room for independent choices means more space for Chinese influence to expand, without confrontation, without a single missile fired. This is a 2-decade strategy paying dividends precisely at the moment of maximum stress on the American-led system. Wei Qi, one stone at a time, across decades, until the encirclement becomes impossible to deny. Now the deepest layer, the one that reveals the true ambition driving everything else. China is cataloging how America's allies behave under pressure. Every hesitation from South Korea about joining Project Freedom is noted in Beijing. Every European government quietly exploring alternative energy arrangements is noted. Every Gulf state sending diplomatic signals toward Beijing is noted. Every nation beginning to question whether American security guarantees are reliable enough to stake their entire strategic future on is noted, cataloged, incorporated into China's map of where American influence actually ends. China does not need America's allies to switch sides. It does not need Japan to abandon its alliance or Europe to choose Beijing over Washington. It simply needs them to become less automatic, less certain, more open to hedging, more willing to consider Chinese perspectives on issues where they previously deferred entirely to Washington. Because in a world where American alliances are strong and reliable, Chinese leverage is limited. But in a world where American commitments are questioned, where reliability is uncertain, where allies are hedging, the landscape changes. Quietly, permanently, in ways that compound over time. This is China's deepest game, not defeating America in direct confrontation, but gradually reshaping the conditions under which American power operates, until Beijing's influence expands not through conquest, but through the slow erosion of the architecture that once contained it. And right now, in this moment of maximum crisis for Washington, maximum distraction, maximum urgency, that game is advancing faster than at any point in a generation. Consider what China has accumulated since this conflict began. It has purchased Iranian oil at below-market prices, while competitors pay premiums on disrupted markets. A direct economic advantage, compounding every day the closure continues. It has watched American military resources and political attention get consumed by a Middle East conflict. Resources that cannot simultaneously focus on the Pacific, on Taiwan, on the strategic competition that Washington has publicly identified as its primary challenge. It has observed American allies straining under a war they did not choose, allies quietly questioning their American alignment in ways they were not questioning 18 months ago. It has positioned itself as the indispensable actor in any credible resolution, the party that must be engaged as a partner, the party whose cooperation is genuinely necessary, and it has done all of this without firing a single shot, without imposing a single sanction, without making a single provocative statement. This is strategic patience executed at the highest level. Not weakness, not passivity. Active, deliberate positioning that transforms a rival's crisis into strategic opportunity, without ever announcing what it is doing or acknowledging what it is gaining. Watch what happens in Beijing on May 14th. Not the handshakes, not the headline numbers, not the carefully worded joint statement. Watch what China gets that is not in the official readout. Watch what America quietly concedes to secure what it urgently needs. Watch whether the adjustments made in that room accelerate the shift that Beijing's patient Wei Qi has been building toward for 2 decades. Because the evidence of that strategy working is already visible. In the closed strait, in the stranded ships, in the urgent American requests for Chinese cooperation, in the fact that the most powerful nation in the world is flying its president to Beijing to ask for help. The stones are already on the board. The encirclement is already further along than most people realize. And by the time the full picture becomes visible to everyone watching, the game will already have moved on. My name is Dr. Adrian Cole. This is Empire Signal. The next signal drops in 48 hours. Stay with us.